David wrote the article, and theathletic.com has covered college football for quite some time. David, kind of explain the column, if you would. I think everybody, it's almost like blue and red states or yes and no or whatever. Your thoughts about the NIL?
Well, I'm almost hesitant to even call it NIL because it is at this point, and by all intents and purposes, pay for play, which I think has been long overdue in college sports. And, you know, the idea of actual pay for play from the universities has a bajillion different hurdles to get there. We won't even get into those, but they sort of, as I mentioned in the piece, sort of accidentally legislated themselves into this sort of duct tape and twine backwards pay for play, which introduces a lot of issues, but ultimately it gets players paid, and that's a good situation.
David, what do you think will be eventually legislated into this to deal with at least the tampering part of it?
Well, I mean, tampering, the rules are there. They're just not going to be enforced. The NCAA had some representatives at the coaches convention back in January, and they met with a bunch of coaches and basically said, "Hey guys, you're on your own. We're not gonna enforce this." So the rules are there. It's just a matter of a lack of enforcement. Now, a lot of that, they don't want to be seen as limiting players' movement or compensation because of the Alston case. But if they want to sort of penalize coaches for tampering, I mean, I guess in theory you could. But I do think as more and more players are entering college with multi-year 6- and 7-digit deals, the idea that somebody's going to be able to come in and buy you out of a contract that you've signed, it's probably not that likely. So I do think you're going to see some of the player movement slow down as these collectives begin signing guys to multi-year deals, in some cases exclusive, where they hold your name, image, and likeness rights for a long time. So you can't, it's a little bit like grant rights, in a TV deal for a conference, in that they hold your rights, so you can't monetize your name, image, likeness elsewhere. So I think that can slow down some of the movement.
David, is there any downside to any of this that you feel or that you see?
Well, fans are not happy right now. I think that's why I wrote the piece. Is fans feel like everything's changing, and the idea that a guy like a Jordan Addison can sort of up and leave post spring, I don't think that's good for the sport. I think all this movement is probably not good for the sport. I think players should have it, but I think having as many guys in the portal and as many big names on the move is probably not great for the sport as a whole. Now, I don't think the players should have to worry about what's quote-unquote good for the sport, but you can see what happens in the world and say, that's probably great, that's probably not great. So I think that's sort of, the biggest thing. And I think that this whole space is very, very unregulated. You might have some bad contracts. You might have some of these collectives that don't pay out things that they promised, and hopefully those things get pushed out. But I think anytime you have a space that's this new and this regulated, or this unregulated, I should say, it's ripe for some issues, and I think those are the biggest downsides in my mind.
And don't you think that's where the biggest conflict is? Because I often see if anybody has anything that even approaches a doubt about NIL, they'll quickly be painted as not liking the players getting money or anything that. And I think everybody's fine with the players getting money. It's just this chaotic, all the stuff that comes with that. So it's just, do you think that's kind of the collective thought right now among people is, hey, yay for money, but geez, can we just get some policing here?
I don't know. I think in general, most people, I think it's a majority that's sort of happy with money, but there's still a lot of people that aren't, that don't want, quote unquote, the professionalism of college sports, as though they don't have $1 billion TV deals and, $100 million stadiums and $10 million coaches. I mean, that, it's a professional enterprise. There's a lot of people making money. So I think so. I mean, I think the movement stuff, I'm skeptical that that's really going to have that much of an impact. I mean, again, you hear all these people, threatening, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to watch anymore and all this stuff, and my interest is waning. I don't know. I think when you play your rival or a big game and your team is in the top 20, top 15, and you got another ranked team on your home field, you're either going to be in the stadium or you're going to be watching on TV. I think some of that is just sort of a bluff. So
how do they somehow gather this in, David? Who is, The NCAA they have no balls, no power. They don't even have a president here pretty soon. How do you feel? What would be a solution, in your opinion, if there even needs to be one, of how they can kind of keep this from completely going off the rails for long term, not just for while everybody kind of figures this out?
Well, it's not going to be the NCAA. I think if you can have I think cementing in some ways some of the relationships between these collectives and the universities, where the universities have some shared responsibility other than competitive balance, which I think is actually a pretty powerful motivator, as powerful as anything, where they have some sort of oversight on what these collectives are doing and the contracts that they're putting out there and making sure that they're paying out, doing all those things. I think that's the biggest part. I mean, ultimately, people are going to have to get used to the new normal, in which there's going to be more transferring than ever before because you're going to have free transfers, and you're going to have money. And so, I think multi-year contracts, again, I think will help slow some of that down. Will college sports end up making players employees? I don't know. I mean, I think that would be sort of the silver bullet, but there's so many hurdles to making that happen that I don't know that you're going to get to that point. I mean, maybe I wouldn't rule it out. I think it just depends. The one thing that I think might help you there is the coaches are the most powerful people on campus. And right now, the coaches' jobs in managing their roster and obviously the collectives that are sprouting up have a lot of power. And I don't think coaches love that. And so the coaches now are motivated to want to try and make players employees. And if you have a bunch of coaches pushing for that, guess what? It's going to happen because they're the most powerful people on their campus in a lot of cases. So that's sort of, I think, a solution that I've heard from a lot of people. But I think getting there, I mean, we could talk for 5 hours on how many hurdles there are to making that a reality. But I think for now, it's sort of just having the money and the collectives level out, because right now there's a huge amount of variance in how much money collectives have. And I think ultimately in the next 2 years, probably, the schools that want to win the most are going to have the biggest war chest, just like college sports have always been. It's a money game. The cost of admission is pretty high. You look at the schools that win consistently, and you'll look at the schools that have the biggest budget. Most of the time, there's a lot of correlation there, except now that money, instead of going to facilities and ballooning coaching salaries, is going to players. And so it's about shifting your funds and fundraising and having a collective that can do all of that. And for the near future, that's the goal, is having a competent, well-funded collective that can help you, be competitive on the recruiting trail and be able to offer kids packages that are going to bring them to your campus.
David, if we got in the DeLorean and fired it up to 88 and went back in time to a couple different points, do you ever think about this had college sports just let Chris Webber make money off the jerseys and the players get that? Or if during the video game they said, yeah, especially knowing that all their guys are going to play it and see that, if they just would throw them a little bit of money, how much money they might be saving, and these issues maybe wouldn't be as reckless as they are, and they could have been, at least more under the a view that the NCAA can understand.
Oh, 100%. I think if you had some common sense, probably more strict name, image, and likeness rules, because right now, you mentioned it, the NCAA can't do anything. If you do anything that limits player compensation, you're going to get taken to court, and there's a strong precedent in the Austin case in the Supreme Court, and you are going to lose, and you are going to lose handily, and there's going to be 100 lawyers lining up to take any athlete's case if you limit player compensation. Well, 15 years ago, that might not have been the case. You could have had some more strict rules that maybe could have closed some of these recruiting loopholes that, again, I don't even like calling it name, image, and likeness, because it's not really name, image, and likeness. It's basically pay for play. So I think you could have closed some of those loopholes and made it a little bit of a pure enterprise. I still think ultimately players should be paid their value. So ultimately, I think that this is still more fair and equitable, but it is a little bit, it's happened really, really fast. And I think the biggest complaint is that the rules are not exactly clear, and the ones that are on the books, like tampering, are not being enforced. And that's a difficult spot. I mean, there's just a ton of frustration from coaches because you're trying to win, And some people are more comfortable skirting more rules than others, and everybody is sort of like, I don't really know what the rules of engagement are here. And right now, the schools that are the most aggressive and playing the hardest and fastest and loosest with the rules are going to succeed in the short term. And, you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different opinions on what the risk in that is. I generally think it's pretty low, but college athletics and college administrators are generally a pretty risk-averse group of people. And at some schools, there's a lot of conservative approaches, and at some schools there is not. And that variance is, I think as you lose more recruits and start losing more games, I think you're going to get a lot more bold. And I think that when you look at the schools that are the most well-funded right now, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Oregon, Nebraska, these are schools that are super hungry. And I think that correlation is very clear.
David, for the schools that don't have, hundreds of millions of dollars backing them, because college football, it's 100-plus teams, and there's maybe, 25 or so that are really the big money top dogs, if you will. Do you worry at all about collateral damage as far as the schools that can't hang simply because, not that they don't want to, but they just simply can't? Do you see a fracture? I know there's been kind of that end of days, everybody worried about this huge split. Do you think that, though, that is a possibility of where there is even more of a divide between the haves, the have-nots?
I think that what you're describing is basically what college football has been for the last 20 years. It's always been a money game, but again, it's just the money, where it's going is changing. The money is, the amount of money that you have correlates to your success on the field in a lot of cases. Texas notwithstanding, but other places it usually does. And so right now you just got to figure out how to get that money to players. And so, will the super conferences come eventually? I actually think that question is a lot more tied to the television revenue and the television contract than the name of the ranking. So you might be more motivated if hey, our donations are going to be down in the years to come because instead of it going to our administration or the university, it's going to players. We're going to have to shift our budget. Then you might be more motivated to say, okay, well, if we're the Big Ten or we're the SEC, let's go call Oregon and USC and let's kick the tires on, kicking out some schools that aren't maybe carrying their weight so that we can maximize our total number and make our pie share, or our slice of the pie bigger, as big as possible. So that's possible, but I think all this stuff is sort of interconnected, but it's all sort of independent as well. So a complicated question that we could talk about for probably 2 hours if we really wanted to.
David, I think the NIL is something that most of the big boys, and we know who the blue bloods are, those who also think they are, and some cases they are. Do you think any of them ever expected that they could start getting poached? We've seen stories in the last 24 hours, maybe, involving Oregon going after a player at Texas or USC, and USC's names popped up a lot. Pittsburgh's a big school, but it's got a great history, some tremendous history, but it's not thought of in some cases as if when you think, but you think that they may, wait a minute, we thought this could help us. What do you mean people are coming after our guys? And wait a minute, we got to slow this down.
Well, again, I think, if you have exclusive or multi-year deals in the future, which are certainly coming, guys are already signing them right now in the 2022 class, in the 2023 class, I think it will slow some of that down. But I think you got to make your program a place where people, A, want to be, can get to the pros, and can be well paid. And obviously your degree is a part of that as well. And if any part of that is missing, you're probably maybe under siege for some of your best players. And that's just what it is. So, you want guys to be paid. You probably want to have them on, a contract that's probably as restrictive as possible, also being lucrative, and have a good program and have a coach and a coaching staff the guys want to come to the facility and play for, because they have a lot of power. And the whole my way or the highway thing that a lot of coaches have used to fuel their programs, that old way is not going to work anymore because players have a lot more agency and a lot more power than they did a year ago.
David, this isn't a question about right or wrong or anything like that because there's nothing wrong with it, but just in general, your thoughts on the Jordan Addison story, just all of this talk that started a couple of days ago. Obviously, it's been everywhere, but just do you have a general thoughts on that story?
The tampering aspect of it, that stinks. I get it. That's not really great. So the fans that are frustrated with that, I get that. Because again, that is a rule that is clearly on the books. That if a guy's not in the portal, you can't have contact with them, and whether that's direct or that's through an intermediary, obviously there has been some level of contact. So I get that, but that rule is not going to be enforced. So if you're Jordan Addison and somebody offers you a ton more money and you still have a free transfer, then you got to do what's best for you. Because that pro career and that big money in the NFL, that's not guaranteed. If you got $3 million or $2 million or whatever the money that you think you're going to get, 7 digits today versus rolling the dice and maybe getting 8 digits in a few years, but you can guarantee that now and still have a chance for that later, then you got to do what you got to do. So, this is part of all this upheaval that, when all the factors get together, that you're going to have situations like Jordan Addison. And I do think that specific situation is not great for the sport, but that's where it is right now.
Paul just dropped up. He saw a story, but Ross Dellinger has a story up. David Ubben, by the way, theathletic.com, does a great job covering college sports and has for quite some time. Paul, what's the title of that story?
Well, that now that the task force, the NIL task force that is the university administrators are finalizing additional guidelines that are expected to clarify that boosters and booster-led collectives are prohibited from involvement in recruiting, and that would be just essentially enforcing the rule, like you said, David, that's on the books, that boosters can't contact them. But again, there's an easy workaround for that. There is, this guy? Call him for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, if you want to win, people have been working their way around rules for a long time, so we'll see. I think there's definitely a possibility. I've talked to people in the collective space that if there was one way to do it, that's what it would do. But we will see. We will see if they can actually enforce anything.
David, is this created, in your opinion, and I know you got to go and we appreciate your time, is this created almost not quite what the NFL has, where every single month of the year has something that is going to happen that's big? They even make the schedule release in May now feel like it's almost a Super Bowl. The draft in April, the combine in February, the Super Bowl in February. Do you almost see that now happening with college football with this?
Maybe. It's certainly possible. I think, the transfer portal has added a ton of intrigue to the offseason, and it's sort of like a second recruiting ecosystem of, who are we going to lose? Who are we going to add? What is our scholarship count and all those things? So certainly the offseason has gotten a lot more interesting with the transfer portal. I would agree with that.
David, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. David Ubben, The Athletic, at David Ubben on Twitter, with the story that he wrote about about college football today and the landscaping of today. Ross Dellinger with that story. That'll be